Welcome to episode 16 of the Torah Suites podcast. I am Mendel Berlin, TorahSuites@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us. This week's podcast is sponsored by the Yitzchaka family, Le'ilu Nishmat, Zalman ben Yeshua, and Daniel ben Rivka. Thank you, Yitzchaka family. So, John O'Reilly was a respected police officer serving in the Chicago Police Department, and he had a strange phobia, a very big fear. The fear was of spaces under his bed. So he came to a therapist and he said, "I'm afraid that there's something under my bed, and I can't fall asleep at night." The therapist said, "No problem. Meet with me for 6 months. I'm going to give you a discount rate every single week. Meet with me at $200 an hour. In 6 months you'll be cured. No problem. Come start next appointment next week." Next week he doesn't show up. What ends up happening? The therapist all of a sudden bumps into him 6 months later, and he said, "What happened? I mean, you had this big phobia." So he answered him. He said, "Listen, I was going to come to you, but then I met my friend Moshe in a grocery store, and Moshe told me I could fix your problem for $10. What did he do?" He said, "He cut off the legs of my bed." The end. So phobias are something that's very, very serious. And certain phobias, like the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection is one of the most powerful fears in the world. Nobody likes to be rejected, to be vulnerable, and then to be told that they're not good enough. Not only is it a fear of people, but also it leads to some very aggressive behavior, some very big anger issues. Because being rejected is something that nobody wants, and in order to cope with it, people start getting very, very aggressive and very angry towards the person who rejects them. Furthermore, studies show that school shootings happen because the person who does the shooting, the shooter, has been rejected by somebody in the school, whether it be expelled, suspended, or otherwise rejected by a teacher. We know that being rejected is a very terrible, terrible thing. But we also know that this week we have the Parsha of Zachar, and the connection to Parsha Zachar and rejection is tremendous. What happens? A couple of days before Purim, we're reading Parsha Zachar. You should remember, the mitzvah is, you should remember what Amalek did to you on the road, on your way. Amalek ambushed the Jewish people. He attacked the people who were weak and the stragglers behind. Where did Amalek come from? So Eliphaz, who was Esav's son, took a concubine, Timnah, and had a very immoral relationship with her. And what ended up happening was that Amalek was born out of that relationship. Now, why was Timnah at all in this picture? The answer is because Timnah was rejected by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. She was trying to be part of the Jewish people, and the Avos rejected her. And the truth is, the Gemara actually explains that they shouldn't have rejected her the way they rejected her, but because ultimately what ended up happening is Amalek became angry at the Jewish people for this rejection, and because of that, they created a whole motto for their life is hate the Jew. So Amalek was rejected, Timnah was rejected, and those feelings created a lot of hatred, because the only way to deal with rejection is to actually try to destroy the person that rejected us. Because if we feel that person is worthless, then in certain ways we're coping and saying, "Oh, that person's opinion doesn't matter, so rejection doesn't matter." But yet rejection is a very powerful tool, a very powerful idea that exists in the world, and sometimes there is no choice but to reject someone else. So when we reject someone else, we have to do one of four things. Well, actually all four things. Number one, we have to speak very kindly to them. It cannot be a cold-hearted rejection. Number two, we have to point out the positives. We have to say something that's good, not necessarily only the rejection part of it. And obviously first has to be the positive part. Number three, we should never close the door on any relationship. We should never burn bridges. It cannot be a final, complete rejection unless it's a very extreme circumstance. And number four, we should always use I statements. Not "you did this wrong" or "you are no good," but "I feel," right? We're never putting the pressure on the other person and put the blame on the other person. The truth is that in history, when somebody gets rejected, they react very, very negatively. The Chafetz Chaim was very upset at a Rebbe because the Rebbe was at one point in time was very harsh and very rejecting of a certain boy in class. And that boy in class, who was born Leib Bronstein, actually his name became later on Leon Trotsky. And Leon Trotsky ended up causing the Jewish people a lot of pain, a lot of hurt with different policies of communism. Why? This is all because this Rebbe did not show the proper love, did not show the proper care to this young boy. And the Chafetz Chaim was very, very upset at this Rebbe for that exact reason. So when we reject someone, we have to be very careful. Their feelings matter, and if the rejection needs to happen, it has to be done very carefully. The final question we have to address is what happens if we are the ones who are rejected? What should be our reaction? The best solution when we are rejected is to use that negative energy to create, to show that we are actually better than some people think we are. I want to read to you some examples from history, from people who are famous and not so famous, who were told that they were no good, but they persisted and they achieved enormous success. For example, did you know that President Abraham Lincoln was a lifelong failure who was defeated in many runs for the U.S. Senate and Vice Presidency? He was fired by a newspaper editor because he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. But none of these people let all these rejections and setbacks keep them down. So we have to learn from the nations of the world, and more so from examples, everyday examples for Jews who get rejected. We have been rejected throughout history, and yet we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and we keep on moving. Jews who are great or small, who live through their faith, to not give up and pray to Hashem, to take that rejection and to channel into something positive so we could be successful in our lives. So that's been our podcast. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Shabbat Shalom and Hag Sameach. Happy Purim to all.